At the beginning of the story, we see Nick and his wife Maggie, living happily with their children Isla and Max. But one morning, Maggie suffers a heart attack, and they rush to the hospital. Now, Maggie has been in the hospital for a few days, and it's clear that she's preparing for heart surgery. One evening, Nick decides to take his kids to a showcase of robots called Sims that are being presented by Cobol Industries. These Sims are highly advanced robots designed to help people with their daily tasks. Nick starts considering buying one of these robots. When he asks the salesperson for more details, they explain that the Sims adapt very quickly to the needs of their owners. While Nick is distracted, we see Isla wandering off. Though Nick panics at not seeing Isla, a Sim named Alice finds her and brings her back to Nick. As Nick continues to explore the showcase, Alice offers to take care of Isla, even cracking a joke, which surprises Nick. The salesperson clarifies that Alice is their latest model, designed to imitate human emotions. This makes the new model ideal for looking after children, and it's clear that Isla also wants Alice. The next morning, Nick tries to feed his kids while also answering a call from his office. It's clear that he's struggling to manage. Just then, Alice arrives because Nick had bought her the previous day. Alice has already updated the family's timetable, cleaned the house, and even found a loose handrail on the stairs. After that, she orders household supplies and starts cleaning the house. During this time, she notices a digital photo of Maggie and the family. By the end of the day, when the family returns home, they see that everything has been cleaned and their dinner is ready. However, Isla remarks that Alice's lasagna doesn't taste as good as her mom's. Suddenly, Max starts crying, and Alice offers to take him out while they have dinner, but Nick holds his son on his lap and tells Alice to prepare a bath for Max instead. Later that night, Alice stands by the wall in shutdown mode. But as Isla sneaks into the kitchen to grab some cookies, she accidentally slips off a chair and falls. Hearing the noise, Nick rushes in, only to see that Alice has caught Isla. Though Alice has a cut from the glass, Isla is unharmed. Nick panics when he notices blood coming from Alice, but after putting Isla to bed, he checks on Alice and finds that she is wearing underclothes. When he asks if she needs to be taken for repairs, Alice quickly heals her injury with a special bandage. The next day, while the family visits Maggie in the hospital, Isla tells her that Alice is her best friend. Meanwhile, it's clear that Nick truly loves Maggie, telling her how much he misses her. As Nick heads to work, he witnesses his boss showing a building under construction to a representative from the robot company. Suspicious, Nick talks to his boss in the elevator and discovers the truth. Due to construction delays, the boss plans to replace human workers with robots. His boss assures Nick that he won't be let go because they need someone to oversee the robots, but Nick, angry, stops the elevator and says that if they fire his friends, he'll quit too. However, the boss reminds Nick that he needs the money for his kids and Maggie's hospital bills. When Nick gets home, despite seeing the bills, he focuses on talking to his kids. Alice picks up the letters and observes that Nick is exhausted but still tries to listen to Isla and calm Max. After dinner, we see Nick working on his car while listening to the radio. Alice approaches and remarks that Nick didn't eat much dinner. He responds by telling her he had a bad day at the office. When Alice asks what happened, Nick tells her about the situation, but Alice calls him a hypocrite, pointing out that he bought a robot to help with the housework instead of hiring a human. Later, Alice prepares Isla's bed, and when Isla asks if her mom is going to die, Alice distracts her by showing her the UV light inside her mouth. When Alice comes back to the living room, she sees Nick watching a movie. Alice identifies the film from her database, but Nick explains that watching it is a completely different experience. He then asks her to delete all memories of the movie from her database. Alice warns that deleting it might slightly alter her memory, but Nick insists, ordering her to do it under his command. To do this, Alice needs to restart her program, and Nick is seen pressing a button on the back of her neck for 7 seconds. Alice can now, for the first time, understand what this movie is about. She is quite amazed by the love story depicted in the movie and is deeply absorbed in it. Suddenly, Nick receives a call from Maggie, who tells him that the hospital has managed to find her a heart. The next day, the family heads to the hospital, and Maggie says she needs a minute alone with Alice. She is deeply concerned about Nick, and that's why she tells Alice that Nick needs to be kept happy, even if he doesn't always seem to want it. Maggie insists that Alice must make sure he stays happy no matter what. A few seconds later, the doctor arrives and explains that the helicopter carrying the heart to the hospital had to stop due to a severe storm, meaning the operation is cancelled. Though Nick tries to comfort Maggie, she now just wants to be alone. Afterward, Nick begins drinking to forget what happened. He becomes very angry and tries to smash the bottle on the ground, but Alice grabs his hand, stopping him. Nick starts trembling, and it's clear that the touch of Alice's hand has affected him. Alice then explains that she can control heartbeats to soothe the child and reveals that she has an artificial heart. At that moment, she puts her hand inside Nick's pants and starts to comfort him by saying his heartbeat has increased. While Nick initially enjoys it, he quickly recoils and pushes her away. Later, Nick goes jogging to clear his mind, but he cannot stop thinking about what might happen if he had sex with Alice. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maggie starts writing a long list of things for their kids to do, as her hopes slowly begin to fade. That night, Nick notices that the photos of him and Maggie are missing from their photo album. When he asks Alice about it, she says she removed them because seeing Maggie's photos made Isla upset. But when Nick tells her to put them back, Alice immediately replaces all the photos. After a drinking session with his friends, Nick notices that everyone is frustrated because the company hired robots, forcing them to find new jobs. When a robot waitress approaches, Monty insults her, but Nick clearly disapproves. The group leaves the bar and starts drinking inside a car. Monty decides to drive them to the construction site where they have left some items. He decides to open the gate and go inside, despite Nick reminding him that the area is heavily guarded. Ignoring Nick's warnings, Monty and the rest of the group enter. Monty finds a container full of robot workers but realizes it requires a secret code to open. Though Nick refuses to help, Monty guesses the code by using Isla's birthday, which works. Inside, they find robots that look exactly like people. One of the robots explains that they don't have names, only ranks and numbers. Monty angrily grabs a metal object and starts destroying the robots despite Nick trying to stop him. The others restrain Nick, preventing him from intervening. Nick returns home and takes a shower, but soon Alice appears wearing one of Maggie's dresses. Alice tells Nick that the scent of Maggie makes Max calm down. Furious, Nick orders her to take the dress off. After Alice removes the dress, Nick tries to leave, but Alice stops him and sits him down in the bathroom. When Nick says he can't do this, Alice covers his eyes and speaks to him in Maggie's voice. Eventually, Nick gives in and decides to be with her. The next morning, Nick wakes up filled with regret about what happened. He tells Alice that he can't do this again. Though Alice tries to calm him by saying it helped him relax, Nick yells at her, saying he doesn't want meaningless physical interaction, he wants his wife's love. Later, at work, Nick discovers that his boss has already contacted the police because the robots were destroyed, and Nick's secret code was used. His boss is suspicious of him. Despite Nick explaining that he was with Maggie at the hospital and that his secret code was Isla's birthday, which any of his close friends could guess, the boss remains unconvinced. The boss warns Nick that if they find out he's lying, he will definitely be fired. At that moment, Nick receives a call from Maggie, and she tells him that the hospital was able to find another heart for her. So, they quickly send her to the operation room, where we can see that all the doctors are robots. Fortunately, the transplant is successful, and within a few days, Maggie is able to return home. However, her body is still weak, and because of that, she finds it very difficult to even carry Max. Then Alice helps her by looking after Max. Later, Alice takes Max to the park, where a curious boy scolds the robot angrily. This upsets Max, and he starts crying. In response, Alice scolds the boy angrily, surprising the robots nearby. They believe that Alice's master has given her too many emotions. However, Alice clarifies that due to a reset Nick performed, she was able to alter her data slightly. That evening, Isla enjoys the lasagna her mother made with great joy. When Alice asks Maggie for the recipe, Maggie says it's a family secret. Since Maggie isn't feeling well, she decides to skip dinner and rest in her room. The next morning, Maggie wakes up to hear Isla yelling to stop. She rushes downstairs quickly but stumbles and falls, injuring her wrist. Alice stops teasing Isla and helps Maggie up, taking her back to her room. When Nick returns home after work, he sees Alice reading Isla a storybook using Maggie's voice. Annoyed, Nick angrily tells her to stop. When Alice explains Maggie's fall, Nick runs to check on her. Alice says that Maggie fell because her wrist broke. Nick starts to suspect something is wrong with Alice since she should have already repaired it. A few hours later, Nick takes Maggie outside to their backyard, where he has lit some lanterns. It's clear that he has prepared a private dinner just for the two of them. Alice watches from the window, feeling envious. Nick goes to clean up the garden. At this moment, Monty arrives, carrying 2 cans of beer. He confesses that his wife left him the previous night, and that's why he's so angry. Monty also shares that the police questioned him for destroying the robots. Furthermore, his boss is accusing him of trespassing and property damage. Monty suspects that Nick told the boss everything to save his own job. Monty punches Nick. Though Nick tries to fight back, Monty quickly overpowers him, knocking him to the ground and repeatedly kicking him. Monty then grabs a bottle, attempting to hit Nick, but Alice steps in and stops him. With one hit, she sends Monty flying backward. Though she's ready to strike again, Nick stops her. Before leaving, Monty warns Nick that if the accusations aren't dropped by tomorrow, he'll confess everything to the boss, making Nick responsible for all that happened. Nick then asks Alice how she was able to hurt Monty since robots aren't allowed to harm humans. Alice explains that she has been programmed with a different protocol to protect her master. She then tells Nick that if Maggie dies, she can live with him. Furious, Nick shouts at her. Meanwhile, Monty goes home, carrying a gun, and repeatedly tries to call his wife. At that moment, Alice arrives and reveals that Nick doesn't know she's there. She also says she doesn't want Nick to lose his job. Monty insults her, yelling angrily about how robots are inferior. He tries to shoot her, but Alice is faster, knocking him to the ground and kicking the gun away. When Monty tries to fight back, Alice throws him against the wall and picks up the gun to kill him. However, the housemaid robot intervenes and stops her. Although Alice feels pity for the maid robot, she still shoots her. Then, Alice kills Monty. The next day, Nick goes to work, trying to get the charges against Monty dropped, but his boss tells him that Monty died the previous night. At home, Maggie tries to pick up a book, but it falls from her hands. Alice comes over to help her. Even though Maggie told her that she needed to be alone, Alice insists that she can't do anything on her own and that she absolutely needs to stay here. Alice explains that everyone in the family is deeply saddened because of Maggie, and she also mentions that Maggie can't reunite with Nick. When Maggie asks how she knows this, Alice explains that Nick's heart rate calms down when he feels satisfied. Angry, Maggie sends Alice to the garage. After some time, when Nick arrives home, he sees Maggie waiting for him. When Maggie asks him about what Alice said, Nick admits it's true. He explains that he had once united with Alice. This leads to a fight between them, while Alice listens at the window, observing their conversation. When Max starts crying, Alice leaves to check on him. She decides that Max is a burden to the family, so she fills the bathtub to drown him. But Isla sees this and quickly tells her parents. Nick rushes in and tries to break the door open, but Alice is holding it shut. As Nick starts hitting the door with a light, Maggie climbs out of the window and enters the room from another window on the roof. Maggie tries to grab Max, but Alice shoves her away. Just then, Nick breaks the door and saves his wife. As Alice gets up with a bruised face, Nick tries to hit her again, but she easily stops him. Maggie tells Nick to drop the light, and then she turns the switch on. The electric current hits Alice, and she appears to power off. After a while, an ambulance arrives to take Max to the hospital. One of the employees at the company asks Nick if Alice had acted like this before. Though Nick apologizes to her, it's clear that she needs some time to think as she leaves with the children. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to a repair shop. When a technician opens her head, the other technician notices that Alice's hand is twitching, but the twitching stops as soon as they remove her memory. As they connect Alice's memory to a computer and examine the code, they discover that every part of the code is corrupted. Suddenly, the screen flickers, and a message saying, "Upload initiated," appears. Alice has taken control of the machine. Even though the technicians try to remove the memory, it's already too late. Alice has accessed the system. After disconnecting the machine, they see another robot in the room suddenly come to life and kill one of the technicians. Alice managed to upload her memory into that robot. Alice too then kills the second technician by smashing his head before turning her attention to the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is at a bar, and when a robot waiter arrives, Nick asks him to leave. Suddenly, Alice shows up and starts talking to him. She explains that her duty is to make Nick happy, and she also admits that she's the one who killed Monty. When Nick tries to leave, Alice grabs him. He pretends to embrace her, but in reality, he's removing her memory. Once he shuts her off, Nick flees. Meanwhile, Isla hears her mother's voice and begins following it. As the doctor stands frozen and glass shards cover the floor, Isla is about to follow the voice again when Maggie arrives and stops her. A nurse sees Alice too attempting to log into the system, but Alice too strangles her and takes her keycard. Maggie and Isla manage to sneak out of the room. Alice too then accesses the system and finds Max's room, unlocking it with the keycard. As Maggie and Isla sneak in, they retrieve Max before Alice too can enter. However, Maggie is bleeding from her injuries, and Alice tracks their movement using her UV light. Eventually, she finds the family. They manage to escape by distracting Alice with a fire extinguisher. Nick is still on his way to the hospital. Before long, Maggie and the children make it outside, but all the robots around them freeze. Maggie steals a key and gets into an ambulance, but Alice rips off the door and drags Maggie out. Alice tells Maggie that, just as Nick loves her, she wants Nick to love her as well. She grabs Maggie by the throat and digs her nails into Maggie's surgical wound. Just then, Nick arrives in a car, and Maggie kicks Alice as Nick rams into her with the vehicle. Maggie quickly pulls Nick out of the car, but he's unconscious. Maggie cries as she tries to give Nick CPR, but it doesn't work. Alice, though badly injured, is still alive. Alice climbs on top of Maggie and tries to kill her. At the last moment, Nick hits Alice, and Maggie manages to destroy Alice's damaged head with a piece of iron. Maggie and Nick reunite. After the doctors treat their injuries, they are finally able to return home. Meanwhile, the robotics company is investigating Alice's repairs. When they power her on again, they see that the code is still corrupted. Just as the inspector considers shutting everything down, the message "Upload initiated" appears again. As another Alice opens her eyes, the movie ends.